Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. Melbourne, Australia just had their coldest November since 1974.
We Melburnians have endured our coldest spring in 30 years. Meteorologist Jane Bunn is here to break it all down. And Jane, it's one for the record books.
Oh, Mitch, 1992 was the last time spring was this cold. This month was particularly chilly. It's been the coldest November since 1974.
The reason it was cold in 1992 was because of the massive eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines in 1991, which blotted out the sun. But in this video, we're going to discuss 1974. A few weeks after the record cold in Melbourne in 1974, Darwin was destroyed by a cyclone. On Christmas Day 1974, Cyclone Tracy wiped Darwin off the map. The city was uninhabitable for about a year. Earlier that year, Australia had their most extensive bushfires on record, with about 15% of the country burning. The fires of 1974 were about 10 times as extensive as the fires of 2019. Earlier in 1974, Brisbane had one of the worst floods, receiving 32 inches of rain in January. On April 3rd and 4th, 1974, the United States had its most extensive tornado outbreak, with 148 twisters in 24 hours. In 1974, the United States experienced almost 140 strong to violent tornadoes. Compare that to 2018, when there were no violent tornadoes in the United States. During June of 1974, Phoenix had their all-time record heat wave, 18 consecutive days over 110 degrees. I played on the soccer team at Arizona State University that year, and we practiced every afternoon outside at about 3 o'clock. The United Nations Secretary General said in 1974, if sufficient action isn't taken in the next few months, countries could disappear from the face of the earth due to drought and famine. The 5-year-old drought, the worst in living memory, has hit the whole region in West Africa south of the Sahara. June 24, 1974, Time magazine, another ice age. In Africa, drought continues for the 6th consecutive year, adding terribly to the toll of famine victims. During 1972, record rains in parts of the U.S., Pakistan, and Japan caused some of the worst flooding in centuries. Climatological Cassandras are becoming increasingly apprehensive for the weather aberrations they are studying may be the harbinger of another ice age. Telltale signs are everywhere, from the unexpected persistence and thickness of pack ice in the waters around Iceland to the southward migration of a warmth-loving creature like the armadillo from the Midwest. Since the 1940s, the mean global temperature has dropped about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. The Guardian, January 29, 1974. Space satellites show new ice age coming fast. October 9, 1974. The Pittsburgh Press. Climatologists increasingly suspect a gradual global cooling process is causing erratic weather changes from one year to the next, and it's causing a severe food crisis. The 4th deadliest Atlantic hurricane on record occurred in the Honduras during September 1974. Bangladesh had a terrible famine in 1974, which probably killed more than 1 million people. The New York Times reported in December 1974 that the global cooling was a deterioration of the benign climate to which they had become accustomed. The magazine of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration explained in 1974 how the global cooling was causing a food crisis. They said that from 1890 to 1940, man enjoyed the warmest climate the world had known for 5 or 6 centuries. In India, for example, before the global warming trend of 1890 to 1940, severe drought struck about once every 4 years. With the warming, however, and more abundant monsoon rains, drought only came once every 18 years or so. Some climatologists think that if the current cooling trend continues, drought will occur more frequently in India, indeed through much of Asia, the world's hungriest continent. Britain had their longest drought from 1971 to 1974, and their most severe drought from 1975 to 1976. October 6, 1974. Global cooling hampers food production. The New York Times reported unanimous consensus among scientists that the change in global weather patterns posed a severe threat to agriculture that could lead to major crop failures and mass starvation. The National Center for Atmospheric Research showed a sharp cooling after the 1940s and that 1970 was cooler than 1870. The director of the National Center for Atmospheric Research, Walter Orr Roberts, reported that in February of 1972, Earth-orbiting satellites revealed the existence of greatly increased area of the snow and ice cover on the North Polar Cap. The Earth may have entered a new little ice age. There are strong signs that these recent climate disasters were caused by the global cooling. Michael Mann erased the cooling in his hockey stick. He showed 1974 as being one of the warmest years of the 20th century up to that point. But the temperature reconstruction of Briffa and Jones showed 1974 as being one of the coldest years on record, and they showed a sharp cooling after 1938. Briffa's reconstruction was an accurate representation of the historical record, but the IPCC chose Michael Mann's reconstruction even though it was fraudulent because it allowed them to push the superstition that the burning of fossil fuels is causing overheating of the Earth. This graph shows Briffa's reconstruction in red and Michael Mann's fraudulent reconstruction in blue. Not surprisingly, Scientific American has also tried to erase the global cooling from the 1940s into the 1970s. They claim that all the evidence for global cooling after the 1940s was 9 paragraphs written for Newsweek in 1975. Which reminds me of what George Orwell wrote in his novel 1984. Every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always correct. 1974 was a very bad year for weather. Hopefully there won't be a repeat of Christmas 1974 in Australia. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on the Orwellian rewrite of climate history for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki and Upla on the web at realclimatescience.com.